The road was nearly silent, softened by a rising fog that clung to the gravel and drifted low through the fields beyond. Morning was still young, the light barely warm, and the air held the hushed stillness of a day yet to begin. Along the outer edge of the road, where the grass turned wild and untamed, something moved. It was small, not fast, not loud. A soft rustle came first, faint enough to be missed, followed by a slow, dragging sound, uneven against the gravel. Then, parting the reeds near a drainage ditch, a tiny figure emerged. A puppy. Thin-limbed and mud-soaked, the animal stepped forward with the caution of something uncertain of its place. His left front paw did not touch the ground. With each movement, his body shifted in uneven rhythm, as if balanced against pain. His coat, once light, was now darkened by damp dirt and thick knots of fur. Twigs clung to his flanks. His ribs showed clearly beneath the patchy texture of his matted sides. And yet his eyes, dark, low, and wide, remained focused. He didn't bark. He didn't cry out. He simply walked forward, dragging the injured paw gently behind him, and came to a slow halt in front of a lone figure walking the roadside. The man had been walking without purpose, a quiet morning routine in a rural edge town where the road runs flat and long. He stopped. I looked down, then crouched silently. The puppy did not flinch. A moment passed between them. Still simple, not dramatic. Just a meeting. Then the man reached slowly into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a crumpled paper towel with a leftover crust of bread from his breakfast. He unwrapped it and placed the small offering on the gravel beside him. The puppy took a single step, paused, and waited. Then another. He limped forward until his nose met the food. There was no urgency in his eating, only weariness, the kind that slows the body, even in need. He chewed in slow, grinding motions, pausing between bites to look up with soft, expectant eyes. Trust didn't come in waves. It was quiet, almost accidental. The man did not move again, just watched. In the trees beyond the ditch, birds stirred faintly. Leaves trembled beneath the weight of dew. The road remained empty. As the food disappeared, the puppy stood still. His back leg trembled slightly beneath him. Then he sat, curling his tail around his side. His head tilted faintly as if waiting for something, but not sure what. His paw, the one he hadn't used, hung slightly raised from the ground, toes tucked beneath, as if protecting it from the world. A car passed in the distance. The puppy didn't turn. The man let out a quiet breath and whispered only, "Where did you come from, boy?" The pup blinked, slow and steady, the way exhausted creatures often do, not as a gesture, but as a response to presence. There were no signs of a collar, no markings that hinted at belonging. Just the faint odor of standing water and the hint of infection beneath old fur. Something in the man's chest pulled tight. Not pity, not decision, just something human and still. He slid his hand slowly forward and let it rest, palm up, on the ground. The pup inched forward, sniffed, then stopped. A breeze moved through the tall grass behind them, shifting seed heads and sending tiny insects skyward. The puppy lowered his head briefly toward the open hand, then looked away. His ears twitched, soft and low. The trust wasn't complete, but it had begun. The man didn't reach again. He waited. And then, without prompting, the puppy stood. It wasn't fast or certain, but he stepped forward and placed his small, muddy chest against the man's leg. No sound, no cry, just stillness. It was an offering, of weight, of proximity, of quiet permission. The man stayed there for a while, knees bent in the cold gravel, hand resting on the pup's shoulder now. The heat of the small body felt fragile, like something that might drift if the wind rose again. When he finally moved to lift the puppy, it was slow. A slide of arms beneath the belly, careful to avoid the front paw. The pup didn't struggle. His body folded easily into the crook of the man's arm, light as air and heavier than words. He spoke again, softer this time. "You're all right now." The pup blinked once more and leaned in. Behind them, the ditch grew still again, reeds gently closing where the puppy had emerged. The road stretched forward with no sign of interruption, quiet as before, but not unchanged. In the arms of a stranger, a small life was being carried forward, from brush to hand, from hunger to something yet unknown. And for the first time in what might have been days, the puppy let his full weight settle into someone else, not resisting, not hoping, just resting. The small body barely stirred in his arms, only shifting now and then when a breath deepened or a muscle twitched in response to cold. The man walked carefully, boots brushing against the wet grass that lined the path toward home. There was no hurry. The pup's weight, light as it was, demanded slowness, not from strain, but from reverence. To hold something so fragile was to hold time itself. The house stood at the edge of a long field, weathered and simple, with an old towel laid out on the porch from the last time a stray had passed through. The man eased the puppy onto the fabric and sat beside him, not touching him again, just watching. In this light, the matted coat revealed more than dirt. Clumps of debris clung to the skin, but it was the smell that hinted first. Not just the sour scent of neglect or standing water. There was something deeper, older, a sharpness beneath the mud. The pup shifted, licking his dry lips. He tried to sit up but faltered, and when he rolled slightly to one side, the fur near his shoulder lifted just enough for the skin to show through. At first, it looked like a shadow. Then the man leaned closer. The wound was round, sunken, and pink at the edges, not bleeding, but swollen and thickened. The skin around it had begun to harden, and flies hovered briefly before being brushed away. It was a bite, not fresh, possibly days old, and it had gone unnoticed beneath the tangled fur. The man didn't speak, but his eyes softened. He reached for a bowl of warm water he'd brought out and soaked a clean cloth before pressing it near the wound. The puppy tensed but didn't pull away. His chest rose sharply, then fell again. Pain lived there. Not loud, but settled, dull and patient. The kind that waits quietly. He whimpered once, a thin, breathy sound not sharp enough to call distress, but real enough to fill the space between them. The man whispered, "Easy now," letting his voice drift as if speaking to the air rather than the animal. The cloth came away stained, and the man wiped again, clearing the fur until the shape of the injury stood revealed. A clear bite radius. Perhaps from another dog, more likely wild, a scavenger, maybe, from the outskirts of the wooded edge. The pup tried to shift away this time, but his hind leg slipped and collapsed. He stayed down, not in surrender, but from necessity. The man rested a hand near the wound, not touching it now. His fingers hovered beside the rib cage, feeling each breath press upward and sink back down. Under the skin, the tremors never fully stopped. Birds called in the trees behind them. The day was warming, and insects began to stir near the porch light, tracing slow lines through the air. But the porch stayed quiet. After rinsing the cloth again, the man began trimming the fur around the injury with a pair of small shears. Each snip was slow and steady. The pup watched with wide, damp eyes, unblinking. When the blades moved too close, he shivered but didn't flinch. He was too tired to resist. But something else had begun to surface. A kind of understanding, not conscious, but sensed. This presence, this rhythm of care, was not the same as the bite that marked him. The swelling around the wound pulsed faintly, the skin underneath discolored and taut. The infection had already begun to spread, and without intervention it would have made its quiet way through him. No fever yet, but the warmth around the edges spoke of time slipping thin. The man leaned back for a moment and took in the shape of him. Just a pup, hardly past the age of being weaned. And yet he bore the signs of rough living, fractured trust, cautious stillness, and now a wound hiding beneath his coat like a secret. The wind stirred again, brushing loose fur from the porch. The towel shifted slightly beneath the weight of the small frame. The puppy rested his head on his paws, finally letting his eyes close, not in sleep, but in something close to peace. A pause. The man stood and stepped inside briefly, returning with a soft wrap of gauze and a shallow dish of broth. He placed the dish nearby, letting the warmth drift toward the puppy's nose. The scent stirred him. He lifted his head but didn't rise, only drank slowly where he lay, drops gathering at the edge of his jaw. When the man knelt to dress the wound, the pup didn't move. The touch was light, the wrapping gentle, just enough to protect, not enough to restrain. As the light stretched across the porch, the moment settled. One hand rested quietly near the puppy's back, not claiming, not pressing, simply being. The man murmured, almost to himself, "We'll get through this." And beside him, the pup, wounded and still, let out one slow exhale. Soft and full of the kind of weight that comes only after pain has been seen. The sun had barely risen above the trees when the man folded the towel once more around the small body and gathered the pup into his arms. The weight was no greater than a loaf of bread, but it felt heavy against his chest, the kind of heaviness that comes not from muscle or mass, but from meaning. The gauze still held around the bite, though it had shifted during the night. He adjusted it gently and whispered something low, not for response but for reassurance. The puppy did not lift his head. He didn't resist. He didn't pull away. He simply rested there, tucked against a flannel shirt in the smell of earth and pine. His legs hung soft and limp, and his breath moved with a quiet rhythm, the kind that followed exhaustion, not sleep. The man moved carefully, one step at a time, down the porch and toward the dirt road that led back through the fields. There was a shelter an hour away, not a large one, not even staffed full-time, but it was clean, and they knew wounds, the kind that didn't always show until the fur was parted or the eyes looked long enough. The man hadn't called ahead. There hadn't been time, and somehow it didn't feel right to speak the puppy's story over the phone. It needed to be carried, held, not typed. As they walked, mist lifted from the grass like a slow breath rising from the earth. Small birds flitted low across the fence line, and the breeze stirred with a touch of autumn. The pup blinked slowly as the movement lulled him, not asleep but not fully awake either. His body, bruised and thin, leaned with each step into the man's chest, drawn toward warmth and heartbeat. The man didn't speak again for a long while. The silence was not empty. It was filled with something unspoken, something fragile that had passed between them the moment the pup had leaned in on the porch and stayed. It was not trust, not yet. But it was no longer fear. Somewhere in the space between those things they walked. Halfway down the road, the pup stirred. Not from discomfort, but in that restless way an animal does when it senses a shift in its surroundings. His ears twitched, and his head lifted briefly, eyes scanning the open space. There was no panic in the movement, just caution. He looked ahead, then sideways, and finally upward toward the man's face. For a brief moment their eyes met. The gaze held not curiosity nor confusion. It carried something deeper, something weightless and hard to name. His eyes were tired but alert, wide but steady, and there, just beneath the surface, was the echo of something remembered. Not from this man, perhaps not from any human, but from a time before hunger, before injury, a time of softness. He let his head fall back again, nestling near the crook of the man's arm. The movement wasn't intentional. It was instinctive, like water following the curve of the land. The man adjusted his grip slightly to support him, then kept walking. The trees along the roadside began to thin, opening into a wide stretch of land dotted with tall thistles and low patches of goldenrod. A thin stream crossed beneath a broken wooden bridge, and the sound of frogs murmured faintly through the quiet. The pup shifted again and let out a small breath, more like a sigh than a whimper. His back legs twitched once, then stilled. The man paused near a gate to rest. He sat on a low rock, letting the pup lie across his lap while he unwrapped the cloth from the wound to check for swelling. The bandage had soaked through slightly. He peeled it back slowly. The skin beneath was still raw, but it no longer radiated heat. That was something. Not much, but enough to keep going. The pup turned his head and licked at the man's wrist once. A short, soft gesture, not seeking affection, just responding to presence. It passed quickly. Then he closed his eyes again. In the last mile, the road curved toward the hills, and the wind picked up, bringing with it the scent of cedar and smoke from some far-off chimney. The man's shoulders ached, but he didn't shift the weight. He held the puppy as he had from the beginning, close, steady, and quiet. When they reached the edge of the shelter property, the man didn't go straight to the door. He stood in the grass beneath a row of oaks and looked down once more at the animal in his arms. The pup stirred and blinked slowly. Their eyes met again, and in that still moment, something passed between them. It wasn't a relief, not quite hope, but it was the beginning of letting go. A loosening in the pup's jaw, a softening in the man's chest. Knowing that whatever came next, they had already crossed a threshold together. The man whispered, "You're almost there." The pup didn't move, but he didn't turn away. Inside, the shelter was calm. A staff member greeted them with a nod and took them to a side room where the lights were low and the table was clean. The man laid the puppy down gently on the towel again. The staff moved quietly, asking a few questions, taking notes only after the first exam was done. They worked with practiced hands, checking the wound, testing the fever, examining the joints and limbs. The pup stayed still, eyes following each hand but never flinching. He didn't cry. He didn't growl. He watched. He breathed. He endured. When it was done, the vet looked over and said quietly, "He'll need rest and antibiotics. He's fought through more than we expected." The man nodded. Then he sat on the floor beside the towel and rested his hand near the pup's side once more. He didn't pet him. He just stayed. The silence between them was not empty. It held weight. It held a story. It held the beginning of something that didn't need words. Outside, wind moved gently through the trees. A leaf drifted across the path. And inside, in a room made of soft light and slow breathing, a small dog slept for the first time without watching the door. The exam had ended, but the questions lingered in the corners of the quiet room. The puppy, now resting on a fresh blanket, had fallen into a deeper sleep than he'd allowed himself before. His limbs stretched slightly, no longer curled in self-protection, and his breathing had slowed into something steadier. The wound had been cleaned again and dressed properly, and a mild sedative had taken the edge off the ache. The staff moved around him gently, voices kept low, hands always deliberate. The man remained seated against the far wall, his back pressed to the cool tile, watching. The room smelt faintly of antiseptic and warm cloth. It was still early, but the day outside was brightening. Shadows shifted across the floor in quiet rhythms. He hadn't intended to stay this long, but something in him didn't want to leave. Not until the full story had settled. A second vet entered, a woman with a folder pressed to her chest. She greeted the first with a nod and approached the table with measured steps. She glanced at the chart, then at the pup, then leaned in to examine his belly more closely. Her fingers moved with care, tracing gently along the underside of the ribs and down toward the soft tissue near the pelvis. Her brow furrowed. She paused, then pressed lightly with her palm, holding for a moment. The pup stirred, shifting his hind leg. A soft sound escaped him, not pain exactly, but discomfort. She waited, then repeated the pressure in another spot. The movement was subtle, but there, Beneath her hand, a flutter. She felt it again, then again. The first vet leaned closer, watching her expression change. He tilted his head, curious. She looked at him and whispered low, not alarmed, just steady. "There's more going on." An ultrasound was brought in. Not part of the original plan, but now necessary. The machine warmed as gel was applied. The probe touched his abdomen, and the image flickered onto the screen. Within seconds, the shape emerged. Not just one heartbeat, a second, and then a third, faint but rhythmic. The room went still. The woman leaned back and exhaled through her nose, eyes still on the screen. The pup lay quiet, unaware. His body, though battered, had been carrying something beyond himself. Life layered beneath life, fragile, forming, and hidden by his pain. He wasn't just injured. He was pregnant. A young female, likely no more than 6 or 7 months old, barely more than a pup herself, and yet carrying others. It was rare, though not impossible. Misidentification wasn't uncommon in strays when signs were obscured by fur, by trauma, or by the haste of early triage. But here it was, unmistakable. The swelling had been masked by weight loss, her small frame shrinking under days of dehydration and exposure. But beneath the suffering, something had persisted. Quietly, stubbornly. The man stood slowly, his knees stiff from sitting. He stepped closer, stopping just short of the table. The vet turned the screen slightly toward him. He watched, saying nothing. In the flickering grayscale, one of the tiny shapes shifted. A heartbeat pulsed again. There was no denying it now. The room took on a different silence, not heavy, but reverent. What had seemed like a rescue of one had become something else entirely. The man whispered, "She was trying to survive for them." It wasn't a declaration, just the kind of truth that finds its way out when words are needed less than feeling. The vet nodded. "She'll need time, rest. She's early, but not by much." They cleaned her more thoroughly then, washing away the last of the dried mud from her ears and tail, combing gently around her eyes. She woke once during the process, blinking in confusion. But when she saw the man nearby, she stilled. Her gaze found him, and her chest rose. Then settled. The ultrasound had changed things. Not just the diagnosis, but the tone. Care became softer. Instructions, quieter. She was no longer just a patient. She was a vessel now for lives that had not yet seen light. The staff arranged for her to stay and monitored her closely over the coming days. Nutrients were added to her meals, and her bedding was changed twice daily. Antibiotics were measured against the needs of her unborn litter. The man visited often, though never stayed long. He'd come in after work, boots muddy, hands cleaned. He would sit just beyond her reach, reading a small notebook or speaking in low tones the way someone might to a bird near a windowsill, offering presence, not pressure. She didn't wag her tail, but she watched him. Every time. And when he left, her eyes would remain fixed on the door for several breaths before she tucked her nose back into the folds of her blanket. On the 5th day, she stood on her own. Her gait was still uneven, but the limp had softened. The vet watched from behind the glass and noted the shift. Her appetite had returned, slowly, and with it, strength. That evening, the man was allowed to walk her for a few steps outside. She moved carefully, her paws tentative on the gravel path. But she didn't resist the leash. She followed its gentle pull with quiet resolve. At one point, she paused and looked up at him. Her ears flicked forward, and her eyes held steady. There was no fear in her posture now, only tiredness and the beginnings of something steadier. He knelt beside her. "You're not alone," he said, the words barely more than breath. She blinked once and shifted closer, resting her side against his knee. They stayed like that until the wind picked up, rustling the nearby trees. Leaves moved in spirals across the ground, and the sky dimmed into evening. Somewhere, far beyond the shelter fence, a dog barked in the distance. She lifted her head, listening, but she didn't move. Not yet. Inside her, life continued, beating, forming, unaware of its fragile path to arrival. And around her, the world adjusted itself, just slightly, to make room for more than one small survival. The morning was still and pale, brushed with the silver light that comes just before warmth returns to the land. A thin veil of mist hung low across the open field beyond the shelter's fence, softening the edges of trees and turning every sound into something quieter. The season had shifted while no one was watching. The bite of cold had eased. Grasses had pushed higher, gone to seed. Time, though unnoticed in its passing, had moved forward. Inside the shelter's outer enclosure, the gate clicked open without urgency. The man stepped through and waited, holding nothing, offering no command. His hands were bare, his pockets empty. He had learned not to fill space with expectation. She emerged slowly from the far corner. Her step, now surer, touched lightly on the gravel before pressing into the worn path. The limp had faded to a faint stiffness, no longer visible unless one knew where to look. Her coat, once clumped and matted, had grown into a soft layer of short brown and white fur, marked by faint scars that no longer held pain. She held her head lower than some, and she walked close to the ground, but there was no fear in the motion, only awareness. She had changed, and not just in health or weight. Something in the shape of her movement had quieted. A new stillness lived in her body now, not frozen or uncertain, but calm, the kind of quiet that forms after surviving something that tried to undo you. She walked with the rhythm of one who had carried life and came through the middle of it. Behind her, just a few paces away, a second set of feet padded softly in the morning light. He was smaller, still round in places. His legs are slightly too long for his growing frame. He paused often, nose down, distracted by the smell of a crushed leaf or the flutter of something small in the grass. But each time he lagged, he would glance up and find her, then move again, always keeping within reach of her shadow. She let him. She did not call or nudge, she did not wait, but she did not leave him behind. She moved as if she knew he would follow, and he did, sometimes running to catch up, sometimes skimming close to her side as if needing to feel the rhythm of her gait to find his own. The man watched from where he stood. He hadn't touched the pup much, not yet. The young one had been handled by others during the first weeks, nursed, weighed, and cleaned. He had grown up behind soft walls and tending hands. But now, released into open space, his instincts had shifted. The wildness beneath his skin had stirred, and it was his mother who taught him how to hold it. She stopped near the edge of the enclosure where the tall grass met the fence and stood still for a long time. The wind moved through her ears, and her nose lifted slightly into the air. The field beyond carried scents of old rain and insects, of distant birds and warm soil. She listened. The pup stepped beside her and mirrored the motion, his nose twitching, unsure of what he smelt but trusting that it mattered. The man stepped back. He knew she could leave now. The final checks had been done. Her body had healed. The pups, there had been 2, had reached weaning. One had been placed with a local family near the wood line. This one, the male, had remained with her. The decision hadn't been discussed aloud. It had simply unfolded that way. He had followed her from the moment he could walk, and she had let him. Their bond, though not loud or expressive, had formed through repetition, through shared silence, through soft sounds exchanged in darkened corners of the kennel, through the small licks she gave him when he cried, or the way she circled the stall before lying down beside him each night. Now, at the edge of the shelter's field, she shifted her weight and placed one paw just beyond the gate. It wasn't a dramatic step, nothing urgent, but it carried the weight of return. She walked forward slowly, and the pup followed without needing to be called. The tall grass bent beneath their weight, springing back in their wake. The wind, warmer now, moved in low waves across the landscape, carrying their scent into the trees. They did not look back. The man watched them until their bodies became shapes rather than forms, until the rhythm of their walk became one with the movement of the field. He said nothing, made no sound, but a breath eased from his chest and remained in the still air. There had been days he had doubted this moment would come, not because he didn't believe in healing, but because the gap between survival and freedom was wide. Some animals never made the leap. Some could not. But she had. Not only survived, but carried life. Not only healed, but protected. The boy beside her, a mirror of her in color, though softer around the ears, paused once to turn his head. Just once. His ears flicked forward, then back. Then he lowered his gaze and followed her into the grass, disappearing just behind her flank. The field was quiet again. The man remained for a while, not as a witness, but as a presence. The kind of presence that carries nothing in its hands but remains full. The sun continued its climb. A hawk circled somewhere in the far distance, and the wind shifted again. In the place where two lives had walked forward, only footprints remained for a time. Then even those were gone, softened by the wind and swallowed by the gentle sway of the morning field.